John, how's renovation going?
Oh, it's going. A bunch of stuff is done. A bunch of stuff still needs to be done. Sometimes it rains.
This is like a description of life.
Yeah,
basically.
Now I'm just trying to like make my peace with the fact that things are not done to my standards, and it's like just let it go. It's fine.
Have you met a human being, much less a contractor, that can complete anything to your standards? Like, how does that go for you at work?
I allow myself to do some amount of nagging and some amount of asking for things to be redone in a better way, but at a certain point you have to be like, look, just it is what it is. Just go forward. Friday they're doing the front door, I think, so that'll be that involves a lot of potential detail work and a lot of potential for me to be disappointed in what ends up happening. But
that's the way you look at this. Is there not a lot of potential for you to be delighted? It's a lot of potential for you to be disappointed.
Oh yeah, no, forget about delight. And then finally, like, painting at the end. And I'm hoping, even the painting, I'm like, boy, like, will the prep work be done to my satisfaction? Almost certainly not.
The prep work. You don't even
surface prep, like, because they're not stripping all the paint off it. They just want to paint the trim and get out of there. But I want it, Anyway, I have demands.
Really? Yeah, I had no idea.
I mean this in the nicest way. Like I can't imagine being you.
No, you would have complaints about some of these things too, because sometimes you make a cut in the wrong spot. Sometimes something isn't square when it should be. Sometimes corners don't meet up the way they're supposed to. Anybody can look at them, can see that that's not right. It's just a question of, does it bother you? And sometimes you just gotta just let it go and just be like, all right, whatever.
Wow.
Anyway, I'm very particular.
How does this work out for you at work? Given that you're so particular, how do you continue to have coworkers, or do you just do everything single-handed?
It's great for programming. The computer's really particular too. You tell it to do the wrong thing, it just does whatever. You have to really get it exactly right, because if you don't, it don't work.
So you want to talk about Safari being the new IE some more?
Nope.
There were actually a couple things about that I wanted to get to this week.
Well, you should have put it in the follow-up then.
Hold on.
See how easy it is.
For those who are listening, Marco just typed into the show notes in the very first entry of the follow-up section, Safari is the new IEFU.
Yes. So
you don't need the FU because it's in that section as redundant.
And John has deleted the letters FU. Oh, God. And then added a sub-bullet, Marco talks.
Yes.
So since I will blindly read the document, it appears, Marco, that we have some follow-up with regard to Safari's new IE. Would you like to tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. First of all, we did get a good email, actually just like an hour ago, from somebody named Lauren, who says, don't be so dismissive of web applications. I work in ocean freight. My job involves using a wide variety of web apps almost exclusively. He or she goes on to list a whole bunch of different things that are all like, I believe these would be called line of business applications. Is that a fair judgment of all this stuff? Talking about how they're all on Windows machines. They use this internal tracking app to do all this other stuff, and then also talking about things like the general public accessing government websites and everything. So improvements to web functionality are very much appreciated by all this stuff, and also I should not be dismissive of web apps. And I think this is the perfect example of where cross-platform, write once, run anywhere, universal accessibility kind of applications make perfect sense. Like any kind of line of business thing where you are a bank and your employees have to use a management system from all the different branches to, conduct business and enter information from customers and check on systems. Make that a web app. That's great. That is, the web is very good at that kind of thing. I'm not arguing in whatever I've been arguing about this. I'm not arguing that the web apps or that the web is useless today, or that it has no place in the market. Only that that native apps have replaced quite a lot of it and are probably the new hotness. In the same way, like Visual Basic apps for a long time were line of business apps. Before web apps were really a big thing, and it was never like a huge, massive amount of the software business in like the parts that anyone knew about. But it was still like there was big business to be had there, but it wasn't Adobe wasn't writing Photoshop in Visual Basic. Web apps serve a lot of that same role where there is a lot of usefulness to them. There's tons of applications for which that is the right choice. But most of those are going to be boring types of things that are, internal to companies or, government websites and stuff like that. Like it's this kind of stuff that there's not a lot of action happening there. It doesn't get a lot of consumer attention. And if you're launching a new consumer focused service, a consumer focused application, that probably isn't the right choice today. So that's mostly the angle I was coming from on that.
I think the difference is not so much that like they're boring or anything. It's the difference of the customer. So like individual persons, like consumers, they have a different value system than governments, really big corporations or whatever, because those large entities made up of lots of people, there's institutional knowledge there of, it's no one person has to be smart or wise or have forethought. There's a lot of institutional knowledge, and there's a lot of experience with this type of thing. If you are a very large company that's been around for any amount of time, you've been burned by a vendor, whether it's like having based your entire company on Visual Basic and having Microsoft like change things around, or having their priorities change, or doing everything in Java and then having Sun get bought by Oracle, or like every big company has been burned by
Lotus Notes.
Yeah, by some proprietary system owned and controlled by a single company. And so they kind of they act with different set of criteria. They're like, the most important thing to us is not to get tied down to a single vendor, to sort of be masters of our own destiny, to not let this thing, which is supposed to be like a supporting thing that helps us run our business, do we really want to be super tied to, like you said, Lotus Notes, to IBM? Are they a trustworthy partner? Are their priorities aligned with our priorities? Or are they just trying to sell us something? Like getting entangled with other big companies and making your company's fate rely on some other company's fate is something they want to avoid. So big companies are very incentivized to find a solution that that gives them options. So if you do it like you do it on the web, doesn't mean you're still going to have to develop. You're going to have to like migrate all your users from one browser to another, and things are going to break. And maybe if you did everything on IE6 with ActiveX controls, you realize you were actually kind of tying yourself to Microsoft anyway, or whatever. But that is a very different value system than consumers. Individual consumers are not making these judgments like, I don't want, most of them. I mean, we know the people who are like, I don't want to tie myself to one company, or but the vast majority of individual consumers just don't think that way. They're just like, is it easy to use? Can I understand it? Is it nice? Is it convenient? Is it popular? Have I heard about it? So on and so forth. So that, I think, is the biggest difference. And it's not so much the things they're using are more or less boring than consumer applications, because sometimes they're really interesting and sophisticated depending on, like, the business they're in. And even things like government stuff, I guess it's kind of boring by definition, but that stuff can be super important. And so much government stuff has moved to the web as opposed to moving to Visual Basic applications or whatever. And I'm sure parts of the government probably went through that phase where Microsoft did convince them that, like, oh yeah, no, if you do this, everyone has a Windows PC and it will be fine. And the government learns, like, that's not a great plan either, right? So I think that heavily influences the value of a solution based on like what your criteria are. And I think Marco is right that, like, all the people who complained about Marco, I don't think anyone denied the overall trend of, like, and you said it in the last show, we had the sort of Web 2.0 phase where the consumer-facing sort of interesting things that got written about that were interesting to individuals was all a new website, a new fancy website. And now we're in sort of the app era, where all the things that we write about are apps. And maybe 10 years from now, it'll be something else. But, like, that is definitely something that's going through, a transition and a cycle and a trend. But the web stuff, the value it has to large entities and to anyone who doesn't want to hitch their star to some other company whose interests may or may not be aligned with them, continues to be a viable thing. And like I said in the last show, like, I don't think anyone's saying the web is going to go away. The web will probably be around as long as email, because, like, once something goes out there that's as widespread as the web and that is as decentralized as the web, lots of people are incentivized to keep that being a thing. Like, if suddenly the web was dwindling because all consumers were using apps or whatever, many large entities and companies and governments and everything are highly incentivized to make the web still be a thing, because they don't want to be, can you imagine, especially if Apple's the only game in town, Apple does not want to do what the enterprise wants to do. Enterprise needs its own thing.
No, and the Apple getting that role would be the worst for everybody, including Apple.
Yeah, Apple just wouldn't take it. They'd be like, whatever, if you can figure out how to use it. Like, I mean, they do, they have the corporate thing where you can send out, hey, you can push this application to all your employees, and IBM wants to make iPad apps for everybody, right? Like, they're moving in that direction. But I have to think that, it's the same thing all over. Like, as good as IBM's iPad apps may be, I'm not saying it's a bad solution for everybody. If you have some factory and they can give all your employees iPads and use this application to run your business, that's probably good. But boy, it's a ticking time bomb. Like, there's a time limit on that. At some point, either iPads aren't going to be a thing, Apple's not going to be a thing, that OS is not going to be a thing, your apps won't run on the new version of the OS. Like, it's just a matter of time. Whereas the web, no one's decisions can make your crap stop working immediately. You just know that I'm signing up to keep my web apps working year after year after year. But hopefully that will not be as drastic as, like, if IBM totally changes strategy, or the Apple-IBM partnership goes away, or Apple decides that they're not making iPads anymore because they can't sell them and they're doing everything with VR goggles or whatever.
Right, and most of these web standards that are pushing the envelope now are things that this massive class of applications generally doesn't really need. I mean, and that isn't to say they can't be made better by them, but much of the time they actually can't.
Well, it's a leading indicator. Like, these technologies are not going to be relevant to the enterprise for many, many years. But the only way anything ever becomes relevant to the enterprise is it's been around for many, many years, and everyone's implemented it. And this is the third implementation in every web browser. And it's like, okay, now finally, enterprise. I mean, it took so long just to get off IE6. Like, for the longest time, I was like, if it doesn't work on IE6, I don't care. And while that was going on, every other browser was getting better and better and better. So when IE6 finally went away, mostly because Microsoft, sort of killed it itself when it realized it has to start moving again, everybody else had, technologies that had been worked out in the market for so many years that by the time the enterprise woke up and installed like IE7 and IE8, or maybe gave people Chrome or Firefox or something, like, wow, look at all this great new web. Where did this come from? Well, it had been developing the whole time when you were stuck in IE6. So I think all this web tech, you think, oh, it's not relevant to current enterprise apps. It's going to be relevant to enterprise apps in 5 years if any of these things actually gain widespread adoption.
That's sort of true. So I'm glad you brought up IE6, because as someone who writes websites for other companies for a living, I don't know if Marco's characterization of line of business apps on the web earlier was 100% the way I see it. The reason I see companies deploying line of business apps to the web is because of easy deployment, not necessarily because the technology of the web in and of itself is superior. And so I cannot tell you the amount of times that up until very recently, like you were saying, John, we would be asked to do a website, either an internal like intranet or sometimes a public website. And we would ask, okay, well, what are the browser requirements? Well, the most modern version of Firefox plus one back, the most modern version of Chrome plus one back, and the most modern version of Safari plus one back. Oh, and all the way back to IE6. What? Why? Well, you don't understand. All of our computers, our standard build for all of our computers is still rocking IE6 because our security department hasn't approved IE7 through 14 or whatever they're on now. So yeah, you have to make this work on IE6 too. What? So I think the reason they do this is because they want to have a way, businesses want to have a way to very easily deploy software to their users, particularly line of business software. And so the easiest way to deploy that software is to not really deploy it at all and just put it on a web server and tell people go to this URL. And thus, that's why we were always targeting IE6 for the longest time, is because all of these standard builds on all these computers were on ancient versions of IE and typically Windows XP, sometimes even today. And so because of that, we would have to support these old versions of IE. And all of that was about deployment. It's not about being available everywhere in the sense that the web is available everywhere. That probably didn't make sense. What I'm saying is it was just about getting this software onto their users' machines. And the easiest way to do that is to put it on the web and target whatever browser they're using. That's why all these old government websites, like you were saying, John, all target IE6 is because that's what the government was using. And why all of these old websites were using ActiveX controls. And again, you referred to that briefly, John. All of this stuff was because the only thing that these companies cared about was the stuff that they themselves were using. And so there was no incentive to make it better for anyone else, except very recently when they started to realize, well, having a really crappy website, that's kind of a detriment. We should really pay attention to this stuff.
Yeah, they move slower, but like, I mean, I'm assuming right now you see far fewer instances of IE6 just because Microsoft is moving on. Like they're killing it as best they can. They're force installing newer versions of IE. They're stopping support of OSs that could run IE. Hell, they're trying to kill 7 and 8 and 9 as fast as they can as well. So Microsoft is moving again, and people are going to have to catch up. But yeah, they're like it's the same reason we do all the Igloo ads. Like internet software, frequently companies are not incentivized to make their internet good. So it just moves slower. It doesn't mean that it's never going to get better. It doesn't mean that it just means that for a really long time, everyone else's web apps are going to be way better than yours because no one cares about the internet. But at a certain point, it just becomes embarrassing and ridiculous. And it's some executive somewhere is going to realize they can get a lot of points by making everyone in the company better by bringing their intranet site or their line of business web application up to the standards of 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And everyone will be like, wow, this is so much better, because it will be, because they'll stop using, ActiveX controls and frames and whatever the hell they're using to do their intranet site. So that's a slow motion type of thing. But I mean, they could just as easily be deploying everything as Java applets, or because they do control both ends of it, they could do all sorts of crazy things. Like, they could do a Citrix thing and run Windows apps that you can access from everywhere. Like, enterprises have been known to do many, because they control both ends. It's not like they have to say, we just need this to be available everywhere and easy to deploy. There's lots of things that companies will sell you that are, don't have to install any software. People just click this icon on their desktop and they can get your app and it's automatically up to date. It doesn't have to be the web. But I like to think that enough companies have been burned by the proprietary solutions now that the web has a certain appeal that the other solutions don't. And even going so far as say, the web, and also nothing like ActiveX in the web. Like, we're not going to do everything in Flash. We're not going to do everything in Adobe Air. We're not going to do it in ActiveX because we've learned that is a mistake. We're just going to stick to the plain old web. It's good enough for, everything else we do on the web as consumers. Our site will be crappier. It will be older. It will be uglier. But it won't be based on anything that we have to pay like an annual fee to some other enterprise company for. Unless you're running everything off IIS, then I'm sorry.
That's my everyday, John. Ask me what our intranet is at our company that, among other things, does intranets for other companies.
It's got to be SharePoint, right?
What version, John?
Oh, I have no idea. I don't try not to go to our SharePoint site. I didn't even know there were versions. Like, is it they're doing years for SharePoint, like 2013?
Oh, keep going.
I don't know how old it goes back.
Yeah, well, it goes back to 2007, but we are mostly on 2010. This is in the year 2015.
That's pretty good, I think.
Is it usually, by Microsoft standards, like, was the version 2010 actually introduced in 2009?
It's like car model years, yeah.
I think that's true. I don't remember off the top of my head. I totally understand what you're asking. I don't recall. But I do believe 2013 was introduced in 2013. And as with all things, so SharePoint 2007 was, I think that having my nails ripped out would have been a more pleasurable experience than coding for SharePoint 2007. SharePoint 2010, in 3 years, made it just barely livable enough that I didn't immediately quit my job when they said, oh, you have a SharePoint 2010 project to do. And supposedly 2013 is decent, so I hear from the people that do SharePoint all the time.
Well, it's like desktop Linux. It's always getting better.
It's always getting better.
Now, our first sponsor this week, I'm actually serious. This is not a joke. Our first sponsor this week is Igloo.
Nice.
Igloo is an intranet you will actually like. Igloo lets you share news, organize your files, coordinate calendars, and manage projects all in one place. And that place is not SharePoint. igloosoftware.com/ATP. Now, you are probably at your job, you, the public, I know Casey and John, this is true for you. Your intranet is probably something terrible. It's probably built on SharePoint or something like that. The world of intranets out there is pretty rough, except for Igloo. Igloo really takes the best of the modern consumer web technologies and brings them into a corporate, safe, intranet private environment. And so you can have things like Twitter-like microblogging and annotations on coordinated document editing and stuff like that. You can do all this stuff right inside of your intranet in your company privately for you. They have a huge upgrade recently that revolves around document tracking, how you interact with documents, how you gather feedback. You can track changes, comment on people's stuff. They can get now somebody wrote in. Last time I talked about read receipts for documents, and somebody said it's supposed to be read receipts. Is that, which one am I supposed to be saying here?
I think I would have said read, but I flip-flop back and forth.
Okay, well, whether it's read receipts or read receipts, Igloo offers read receipts on documents so that you can do things like you can make sure that that certain recipients have read and acknowledged new policies or disclosures, any kind of handbook kind of thing. This is often useful for HR purposes, regulatory purposes, stuff like that. All these things that companies that are real companies, unlike what I do, have to actually deal with. And you can also you can do an amazing amount of functionality with Igloo. Things like, as I said, viewing, annotating documents. All of that is built on HTML5. There is no Flash. It's not Java. There's no plugins. It is all HTML5. And so this allows you to work with all that functionality of viewing, editing Office documents, stuff like that, all the tracking, all the microblogging. All of that works on mobile devices, on every device. So they even make it work on BlackBerries. It works on everything, and everything is fully responsive. So all the layouts work on any screen size. New screens come out, it already works. And they also, you can customize your Igloo intranet to, give it whatever design you want. If the marketing department wants their own color scheme, they can have it. It does all that for you. Sign up for a free trial today at igloosoftware.com/ATP. And if you have a group that is 10 or fewer people, it's actually free, like indefinitely, forever. Give it a try. There's also a free trial. So even if you have a bigger group, give it a try. Free trial. No reason not to. If your company has a legacy intranet that looks like it was built in the 90s or in, quote, 2010, you should definitely give Igloo a try. igloosoftware.com/ATP. Thanks a lot to Igloo for sponsoring once again.
And for all the people who think this was planned, like we led into this with the internet talk, you do not understand how the show works.
No.
We are not that deliberate.
You vastly overestimate our organization.
So speaking of organization, one more thing I wanted to talk about. Websites, I don't think, deserve all of the abilities of native apps. For one key reason. There is no app review for websites, and you frequently visit websites accidentally or without opting into certain behavior. The web kind of happens to you as you're browsing around. You click a link, you don't know where it's going. And so this this link opens up, and whatever page you open is now executing code on your computer. Hopefully not native code, but it can, whatever websites can do, they can do to people who didn't opt in, who didn't even choose, I want to go to this website, because they could just be following a link, or it could even be a script running on somebody else's page, or an iframe embedded on someone else's page. So there's all these considerations. You have to have way tighter security for web stuff, and you have to have much stronger restrictions. And, in an environment like we have on iOS, where apps go through this review process, which I know it's controversial, but I think even though it is imperfect, I think it is definitely a net win. Apps go through this review process, and that's great for consumers because so much crap we are protected from.
Don't you think the iOS philosophy is the reverse of that? It's the idea that apps should have the same restrictions as websites, not that websites should be more restricted than apps, because it used to be apps can do anything and their websites are held in their little box. And the iOS innovation is, let's put a box around apps too. They're sandboxed, they can't see the things, they can't get your location data unless they ask, they have to have entitlements, and the review process is part of that or whatever. It seems almost like they're taking apps and putting them in a box, and websites were always in a box. Now the websites are trying to get out of their box, and the apps, I don't know, are they happy in their little box? It seems like they're trying to make their box bigger too. But they might meet in the middle where you can imagine them having a similar set of capabilities with a similar set of restrictions, in that an app can't get, right now, for example, a website can't get your location data without asking, because that's the thing they built into Safari. If they ever did enable any of these, you can spawn background jobs or, local storage, it pops up a dialog. This is not a perfect system. It's not as fancy as apps, but it took a long time for us to even get the whole, managing app notifications and app storage and which apps can use my location when I'm in the app, when I'm not in the app. It seems like the controls for both of these things, for both the web and the apps, are evolving. The apps are way ahead with the sophistication of the controls on stuff, and that's what you brought up in the last show. You can't just let a web app do this because the controls aren't in place there's no place you can go in settings to decide which website can do what and whatever. But already the websites are pretty well confined, and that was one of the complaints. I don't want to pop up a dialog. Well, apps don't want to pop up dialogs when they ask for location too, but guess what? They have to. So I think we're figuring out, even though you opt in to downloading apps, they're figuring out how to contain software. That's actually a topic if we ever get to in the El Capitan rootless stuff. How to contain software in a safe way. And the web started out much more contained than native apps. And at this point, the sophistication of how to contain apps on iOS is well ahead of where it is for web apps.
Yeah. Also, one issue that we heard from a few people on, which is worth discussing, is browser choice on iOS. And so this is a bit of a multifaceted issue. There's two main problems that people have. On the desktop, you can write a browser using any rendering engine you want, and you can ship it to people, and that's it. On iOS, that is actually forbidden. On iOS, you are not allowed to render web content with anything other than the built-in WebKit. And so so like Chrome, for instance, I mean, let's be honest. When everybody says we want browser choice on iOS, what they're really saying is we want Chrome to be better on iOS. And there are a lot of things, like if Safari drags its feet on implementing some new standard, chances are Chrome on iOS also won't have it because it's that part of the rendering engine it's sharing from the system. So that's one problem. The other problem is that on the desktop, you can set your default browser or your default mail client or your default calendar app. iOS does not have the concept of default apps for these types of things. So in iOS, the default app is always the built-in system app for those kind of roles. And so you can't say, if I click a link in an email message, open it up in Chrome automatically. You can't do that. It'll always open up in the system default browser of Safari first. And anything that just calls open URL on a random web URL, same thing. It'll just open it up in Safari, even if you use Chrome.
That's one of the things that we didn't get in iOS 8 that we're still waiting for, by the way.
Yeah, and so I'm curious, on the desktop, we have that system, and it pretty much works fine. I'm curious, though, what would be the reasons on iOS to never bring that over? At this point, it seems like that might be a conscious decision that they're just not doing. And I can think of a few reasons from Apple's point of view why not. One of the biggest to me, I mean, you can argue things like security and everything. Those are weaker arguments once we have proper technological sandboxing in place, as we just discussed. But
what about for the web rendering, like JavaScript? I think security is still a valid reason for JavaScript because of the incredible contortions they go through to get plain old JavaScript to run quickly with the whole just-in-time compilers, and they basically are turning it into native code. And if you can exploit that engine, that's because, like you said, people can be redirected to websites, and if someone finds an exploit where they can somehow send a payload in a web page that confuses the JavaScript engine in some third-party browser and causes code execution, or they basically just have to say like they do now, third-party web rendering engines. You can make your own web browser, fine, but you can't do what we do with our JavaScript engine. So basically, you're dooming every JavaScript engine to be slow, except for ours. We get to do the fancy, potentially insecure thing, but there's just one of that, and we fix the bugs, and no one else can make one. In fact, you can't even they don't even let you do interpreters, right? Except for like Lua or whatever for games. So I think security is still potentially an issue for stupid, slow JavaScript that they try to make fast. So your choice is, like I said, I don't think you're even allowed to have an interpreter. I don't remember the exact rules, but I think security is still a reasonable answer for the web browser. But I would set aside the web browser and pick my pet peeve. It's like, why can't I pick a different default email application? I don't want to use Apple Mail. I don't want to enter any accounts there, and yet every single application when it wants to send mail sends me to that account. Email does not seem like something that needs a just-in-time compiler or some native. It's just an app. Just define a protocol, let people have a third-party mail application.
Right. Well, for the email side, you lose the security reasons. And I think your security reason there is very good. And by the way, there's this huge misconception that Chrome is not allowed to be as fast as Safari. That used to be the case. That stopped being the case a year ago, at least. Whenever WK WebView was, I think a year ago. Anyway.
Yeah, but it has to use Apple's. At that point, it's just using Apple's engine straight up.
Right. Well, it always was. Just before, there was only UI WebView, which wouldn't do the JavaScript thing because it was in process. WK WebView is way more restricted from what the app can access. Like, if you have a font loaded in your app, UI WebView will show it. WK WebView won't, because it doesn't have access because it's running out of process. That's why it's allowing you to have that native JavaScript compilation, because all the stuff that's happening in that web view is not happening in your app's process.
And because parsing fonts that have illegal values in them is apparently a terrible security hole. I'm going to find a good. Did you see that article today?
I just saw the headline.
Oh, that's so bad.
So, but for mail clients, they don't have that kind of thing. You're right. There is a cost with mail clients of integration. So one of the iOS APIs is to show a mail compose sheet in an app. So to put up a sheet when somebody says share to mail, whatever, put up a sheet that you can pre-populate the subject, you can add attachments, you can do all this stuff that, you can do some of that with a mail too, like the subject, but you can't do much with the attachments and body and stuff like that very easily with mail to URLs. So like some of that they actually wouldn't be able to do if there was a choice. So you can see areas like that where there is like some reason where you can say, well, for integration reasons, it would kind of suck if the system API would only work if their default mail client was mail app.
Well, they would have to define like to be conformant, suitable. Like they're not good at this. It's like the same pipe dream as saying, I would like to replace the Finder. Just tell me what sort of Apple events I have to respond to be a conformant Finder replacement. And like with an email app, maybe it's much more limited. Like, but just you could dictate. You could pretty well dictate. Please, respond to these messages. Support this API. Support these URL port. Like whatever the Apple wants to do to be a full-fledged mail app replacement. Mail apps applications would conform to it because it shouldn't be too onerous. But yeah, you got to leave something for iOS 15 or whatever. They did a lot of stuff in iOS 8 that we thought they wouldn't do, and I think like. We were so dazzled that no one really cared that they didn't do let you pick your default app. But.
Right, and they might do that in the future. I mean, you said like they certainly could, but the more I look at this, like, and there's issues of, first of all, there's competitive issues. Obviously, when people say I want to choose my own email app, they're not looking to choose Eudora. They're looking to choose Gmail. Like, and when they say my own browser, they're looking at Chrome. Like, this is all Google stuff that they want to switch to. Then that is not. I'm sure that is not lost on Apple.
It could be Outlook. Like Microsoft bought Outlook.
Oh, that's true. Yeah,
like whatever the app used to be, and like, or I just reading an interview they were saying, Outlook for iOS is the best Gmail client, and it may very well be because Google's Gmail client for iOS is not that great. But like because email is more or less an open protocol, and because so far Gmail supports IMAP and POP, there is some. And so does Apple, for that matter. That's why you can have a different email client, because email is an open protocol and you don't need to. It's not like Exchange, even Exchange, Apple has Exchange support, sort of. It's like we're almost there with the mail apps. I don't have to use Apple's applications, just that every time I tap a link, I go to Apple's.
Well, and now, the great thing is, like, before, when apps were all writing their own share sheets, and we got this Mail Compose view controller in, I don't know, iOS 5 maybe, the app had to write, okay, here's a share to email option, use the built-in system thing that has all these features, all this functionality. Now, everyone's just switching to the default share sheet, which includes Mail and can also include any other Mail app that you have installed if they have an extension. So now the need for choosing your own Mail app is going down as more apps implement these share sheets, the system share sheet, because now you can just plug into that from any app.
Yeah, you still have like mail to links. I don't know, do mail to links even work on web pages? But anyway, the share sheet does help. It definitely does. But there's still many things in the system, including parts of Apple's thing that will chuck you into the Mail app, because it's like, oh, you want to send an email, and it's share sheet is a more democratic process. That's true. If only it would remember where the hell I dragged the icons in it.
Did they fix that in 9? Or you're not running the beta? You're too responsible.
Here's the thing about that the whole, like, it doesn't take much to make people give up trying to arrange crap. Like, the whole spatial thing. Like, if Springboard didn't remember where you put your icons, no one would arrange their home screens. But it does, so you do. ShareSheet was supposed to remember where you put things, and everyone dragged them around when they first got the ability to do it, and then realized it doesn't keep track of what you do, and then everyone just gave up. And I haven't tried it again either. Like, I've just given up, right? And so maybe when 9 comes out, I'll give it one more try. But it's very easy to be discouraged. Like, I spent time thinking about what should be the first, second, and third one in the share sheet, and then I realized the next time it comes up, it's scrambled again. I'm never going to try again. It's like, well, that was a waste of my time.
Yeah.
All right, tell us about Trim.
Finally, our first real follow-up topic.
Yeah, why does follow-up take so long? And let Marco put things in follow-up.
That's what happens.
Eric wrote in to tell us about, we're talking about trim on SSDs. So there's another way that SSDs can deal with not knowing which space has been freed up and knowing which things can be erased. And that's overprovisioning. Overprovisioning is something I think all SSDs do to some degree. When you buy an SSD that's like 500 gigs, you don't get a bunch of chips in there that are 500 gigs. You get more than that. And that's for a variety of reasons. One, the cells wear out if you use them a lot, so you have to have some extras left over, because when you wear out a section of them, it's like, all right, well, those are worn out, but I have these new ones here that are fresh. And the part of what the firmware is supposed to be doing is wear leveling to try to wear them out evenly or whatever. But the other thing you can do with over-provisioning, especially if it's massively over-provisioned, like 20 or 30% over-provisioned, like the quote-unquote enterprise class SSDs are, is that you can use that empty space, and then when the drive is idle, it can just sort of shift things around and compact them. And as it shifts things around and compacts them, it makes larger regions where it knows that there's nothing, because it has moved everything from that space into another space. Like even when the drive is quote-unquote full, there's still this empty block where you can move things around. And that empty block you can erase, because you know you just moved everything out of it. And then that's the whole point of trim. Like, we didn't get into this. We got into this in the first time we talked about trim, but I realized we talked about trim like 2 times and haven't gone over this. Like, it is slower to write to an area of an SSD that has to be erased first, that you don't know, it's not already cleared, right? So it's much faster to say, oh, this is already cleared, I can write to it directly, instead of having to copy everything out, clear it, write everything back, plus the little part that you added or whatever. So if you have this big empty region, and if during idle time your SSD can shift crap around to make sure that big empty region is always there, and it can clear that empty region so it knows if some new data comes in, it can write it directly to that empty region without reading it in and writing it back out or anything, that is a win. So that is a potential other way to get to deal with not having trim, is just have way more flash memory than you need, and then hope you have enough idle time for the firmware to shift stuff around to keep a large section of ready-to-go area where you can write to quickly.
And tell us about your egregious error about Half-Life.
Yeah, if I had thought about it for a few more seconds, I would have remembered it. They ported it to the source engine a while back. In my mind, it's like, well, that's not the real Half-Life. That's just when they ported it to the source engine. Like, the real one was, you don't want the original game. It looks worse. Anyway, Half-Life is available for the Mac on the source engine. You can buy it, and Steam will put a link in the show notes. Go ahead and play it now, 15 years after we wanted to play it.
I played Counter-Strike, the original Counter-Strike, briefly, and I remember thinking it was really hard, and I know the whole of the internet is now judging me and my inability to play games. That's fine. But I played an inordinate amount of Counter-Strike when I was in college. I played a crap load of Counter-Strike. I loved that game.
It's a good game. You can play Team Fortress 2 now. Is it the spiritual successor? It's a successor, kind of, sort of.
Even that, like I would do the weird way to play Counter-Strike. I would just buy like the one really weird gun, like the Scout sniper rifle that was terrible, and just try to get a kill with it, because that was harder and more interesting to me than just mowing everybody down. I don't know. I'm a terrible gamer.
Not as bad as I am, but that's okay.
Marco will be rocking the No Land Beyond in Destiny.
I don't. You keep tweeting these Destiny things, and
it sounds like it's all made up, doesn't it? It's like those bands from Canada that Merlin talks about.
Yeah, like it looks like a Markov generator makes these tweets. Like I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yep,
all these words. It's like, I think that's a sentence, and I think it's English.
It's great for Twitter, because like Bungie makes up all these basically proper nouns, makes a ton of proper nouns that are very compact, that everyone knows what you're talking about, and that abbreviations of them are also clear. But to other people, those proper nouns mean nothing, because they're just made up words. So it is a high percentage of made up words per sentence.
When you tweet about these things, I wonder if like my brain is blue screen of deathing or something, because I cannot compute what you've talked about. And then I'm like, what thing has happened on the internet that I'm not privy to? And then I get all concerned that there's something important that I'm missing, and oh no, it's not important, it's just Destiny.
Yeah, there is a potential that Tiff could get into Destiny. I know it didn't take when I showed it to her when she was over here, but at some point she could wander over into it on her own, like with no one putting it in her face, and just try it. Like it has the capacity to suck you in. I don't know if she is susceptible to it, but it could happen.
Well, we don't even have a PS4.
Well, that can happen in 2 seconds. You kidding? PS4 could be on its way to your house right now. You could do Amazon same-day delivery.
Wow. So anyway, our second sponsor this week is MailRoute. So MailRoute, what they are is they are basically a mail proxy service. So you point your MX record of your domain, you point that at MailRoute servers. They filter out spam and viruses, and then they deliver to your real mail server the filtered out mail. And so I have I have used email services for so long. I tried my own spam filtering solutions. I've tried using Fastmail's built-in ones. I use Fastmail as my host. I once set up my own server with Spam Assassin and stuff like that. Not only were none of those as easy as MailRoute, none of them were as effective as MailRoute. So to give you some idea of how effective this is, last week I got a spam message. And I noticed because it was so unusual to get any spam. Like, it's not like you still get 3 or 4 a day. I get 0 a day. It was surprising and noticeable that I got one spam message that got through. That's how good MailRoute is. And by the way, I haven't seen one since. So I really am incredibly impressed at how good MailRoute is. I've always heard from Gmail people, I'm looking at you two, I've always heard from Gmail people that they have the best spam filtering. And
oh, no, you never heard that from me. It's good, but it ain't the best.
Honestly, I can say this is the best. I mean, granted, I haven't seen Gmail, but like, how do you beat 0? Like, that's really hard to beat. Well, excuse me, now it's 1 spam message in months. So really, I can't say enough good things about MailRoute. If you are like me and don't want to give Google all of your, mail and information and kind of buy into that whole ecosystem, if you prefer to be non-Google for that, like I do, like I use Fastmail, if you can use any IMAP host you want. The great thing is with MailRoute, you can bring world-class spam filtering service to any email host. Any domain you control, any domain you own that you get email on, you can put MailRoute in front of it and really eliminate spam. It's incredible how well it works. It's also, it's very customizable too. If you want to be less aggressive with your filtering, so they have a thing where they will email you this digest every couple of days or whatever you set it to, of messages they think are probably spam that they have withheld from you, but that they're not quite sure about. And there's just little links you can click to say, all right, this is fine. If they catch anything in there, almost nothing legitimate ever gets caught in there for me. And it's great to have it all summarized in one email that just gets sent out, once every couple of days. So that way I know I'm really not missing anything that's even close to legitimate, if it is important, but I don't have to go through those constantly every day. And if it does catch something, you just click the little whitelist link and it's never a problem again. So it's great. I am very impressed with MailRoute. It is easy to set up, reliable, and trusted by the largest universities and corporations, as well as a bunch of individuals like me. They support LDAP, Active Directory, TLS, mailbagging, outbound relay, everything you'd want from anybody handling your email. So to remove spam from your life for good, go to mailroute.net/ATP for a free trial. And if you use this link, mailroute.net/ATP, you will get 10% off the lifetime of your account. So 10% off, not just the first month or year or whatever, every month. 10% off for the lifetime of your account. Go to mailroute.net/ATP. Thanks a lot to MailRoute. Remove spam and viruses from your life for good.
All right, so now that John has moved away from his beloved iPod Touch because he thought that Apple had abandoned him in the same way they have abandoned him with his god-awful file system, ding, it turns out that things have changed. John, what happened today?
They did abandon me. They abandoned me for years. They released new iPods, but, too little, too late, Apple.
Well, I wouldn't say too. I mean, for you.
Well, for me. We're just talking about me. But anyway, yeah, they released new ones. And what was this? Steve Troughton Smith said, I don't know, I haven't confirmed this, that the new iPods are iPod 7,1, like the model number. And the last one was iPod 5,1. What happened to iPod 6,1? Where did that one go? That was the secret one they withheld to make me buy an iPhone.
That was entirely, it was actually a big plan at Apple just to get you, because you were like this thorn on their side. This guy would not buy an iPhone.
Yep.
Yeah, they really cared about that. I'm thinking about why they can that. Like, I think I have a reason that they skipped, if this is true, that, or basically, why did they not release an iPod Touch for such a long time? Why was this big, long gap? Why was it the 5th generation iPod Touch and it just lingered on and on? Well, the lingering is like, we know that Apple will just keep selling a thing even if not a lot of people buy it, because it's like, well, we're good at making it. We know how to make it. It doesn't change. The cost of parts presumably goes down up to a certain point. Why not keep selling them? But every time we saw sales numbers that were in any way possible to slice and dice so that you could isolate the iPod Touch numbers, they were low. They were super duper low. We know the iPod numbers were going down, and the iPod Touch was part of that. And it's like, we're not selling a lot of iPod Touches. So I can understand them saying, is this a thing we're going to do? Should we bother making a new iPod Touch? Like maybe they were making one and said, should we even bother updating this? Or should we just keep selling the current one? Do we think this new one will bump our numbers enough to be worth the cost of, changing our manufacturing and making a more expensive product? Or we just want this product where the margins just keep going up and up, again, up to a point. But, they make most of the insides, but they can probably get all the parts for that cheaply. So the 5th gen iPod Touch, by the time they were done selling it, they had dropped the price a little, I think. But boy, it must have had some great margins and low volume. And I guess they did the math and said, there's no point in releasing an iPod 6, 1 because it's not going to increase our sales enough to offset the difference in cost of parts and everything. But I guess they came around and said, they finally decided, look, we're either not going to have the iPod Touch anymore and everyone's got to get phones, or it's important for us to have a product in this range, even if it doesn't sell a lot of it, because it's kind of like an entryway product for young people, or, give it to your kids, but you don't want to buy them a phone or something like that. And I think that was the wise choice. And so here we have it. iPod 7, 1 with an A8 processor in the same form factor as it was before. No more little lanyard strap, new colors. This is sort of the Apple coming out, kind of like with the Mac Pro, and saying, no, we still are going to make a Mac Pro, and no, we still are going to make the iPod Touch. And this seems like a pretty good iPod Touch, right?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is they shipped it with the A8, and I think this might be a little hint as to why they shipped it anyway, but going back a sec, they shipped it with the A8, and historically, with the exception of the very first iPod Touch, all the other ones have kind of been a generation behind in their CPU core. And in this, they shipped the same core, just clocked a little bit lower, but the same CPU as the current iPhone. Now, granted, the current iPhone is not going to be the current iPhone in a few months, but this is still significant that everyone expected if they were going to do an iPod update anytime soon, it would go to maybe the A7 chip. And it went to the A8 instead. And so that is significant, even though it is clocked a little bit lower than the iPhones. Matthew Panzarino ran some tests. He said it's 1.1 gigahertz. The iPhone 6 is 1.4. So close. It's granted, that it's not going to be as fast as, but still, for $200, that's really cool.
I think it makes sense, because my prediction is there will be another fairly long gap before this is updated again. So it's like, this is a product line we're going to have. We think it's important to have this product line. Let's give it the most longevity possible by sticking essentially last generation chip. I know it's the current one now, but like you said, Marco, the new phones are coming with the A9 and everything. So this is kind of like, okay, we've ramped up on the A8 enough that we're not supply constrained for our products that we really care about. There's enough A8s left over for the amount of iPod Touches we're going to sell. And pretty soon our flagships are going to be A9 anyway. So let's give us an A8. That will give it the most possible longevity. So we don't have to revise it next year. Because if they put an A7 in it, it would be aging much more rapidly. The A8 is a big bump up, and it maybe gives it an extra year or two that they can let it sit there. Because I don't think it's as important for the iPod Touch to be updated every single year, given its sales volume and its kind of place in the lineup.
Right. So I think if you think back to why does this product still exist but wasn't updated for 3 years? And I think there's a couple of potential reasons for this. Number one, what you said, it really does not sell very well. Relative to, it's a decent business in it's like the same thing where people say, well, if you look at the iPad by itself, it's bigger than McDonald's or whatever. It's a good business in isolation, but compared to Apple's overall business, it's a very tiny part of it. And so that, and even, compared to iOS usage numbers, I know with my app, the usage numbers of iPod Touches are just vanishingly small compared to all the iPhones. It almost no one uses an iPod Touch for my app. And I think most developers I've talked to, I think you could say very similar things. Now, of course, it does tend to skew younger because a lot of kids get them. So maybe if you have a game that appeals to kids, maybe your numbers would be different. But for the most part, it does not sell in large volumes relative to iPhones and iPads. And I think another part of maybe why they were kind of letting it languish for a while, and maybe why the 6 was canceled, the iPod 6, 1, maybe that may be the reason that was canceled, assuming it existed. I think maybe they were trying to see if they could move this demand or this role in the lineup to the iPad mini. Because if you think about what the iPod Touch is for, an iOS device for people who don't have or can't have or just for whatever reason are not going to get an iPhone. And when it was launched, there was no iPad. Now, once the iPad came out, it was very clear that A lot of the people who would buy an iPod Touch, especially people buying them for kids, a lot of that usage was moving towards iPads, especially for things like games. And I think what we've seen over the last few years is the iPad kind of petering out, or at least leveling off to some degree there. And the iPod Touch is still very hot for that use of kids' games and developers' test devices and stuff like that. It's very useful for that. And I think maybe they were trying to see if the iPad could take that over, and it just didn't pan out that way.
I was thinking as you were talking, especially when you said that none of your users are on iPod Touches, I thought to myself, well, that seems crazy because of kids, like you were saying. And I was just thinking about it, and I haven't been like chronicling this in my head because I hadn't really been thinking about it until today. But as I reflect on, going out to eat at a regular restaurant, like a Panera Bread, let's say, or just going about my day outside of work, on the weekends or whatever, I'm thinking back to, well, what are kids using when their parents just want them to shut up and let mom and dad eat? And to my recollection, they're either using their parents' phones or they're using iPads that seem to be dedicated for kid use. And so I think you're onto something, and that maybe answers the question, why did Apple not really care for, what was it, 2 years, 3 years? How long was it?
3.
Why did Apple not care for 3 years? Which, by the way, is insane. But anyway, maybe that's because, to your point, Marco, nobody's really buying these. If they want something that's a portable kid device, just like you said, they're getting an iPad mini. And certainly my reflection on what I see day to day is that they're buying iPad minis.
That's one reason why they might have done this now as opposed to any other time. Another, I think, big reason, they also recently quietly killed the original iPad mini that used the A5 CPU. So the iPod Touch was the last A5 iOS device, and not counting Apple TVs, that's kind of a different story. But this was the last A5-based iOS device that was for sale. And now they have no more A5s left. They are also now all 64-bit once the 5C falls off the lineup, right? Is the 5C still even sold? Is it the free one right now?
I thought so.
Well, that's the other thing everyone's saying about this. They probably had to make this hardware anyway if they're going to make a 6C in the same form factor as a 5C. This is basically a 6C with no phone.
Exactly. And so, they're gonna have some economies of scale here, even though this is a way smaller scale than the 6C will likely sell. But assuming they have a 6C, it'll have basically this. I bet it'll have these same guts, just with the phone hardware added to it. And if they've managed to squeeze that into a $200 product here, getting a little bit more hardware for the phone features and maybe a slightly better camera into the 6C, which might even have this size screen. We don't even know that. That would be a nice high margin product to keep their margins up while still being able to be the cheap phone in the lineup, and they would have they'd have fewer parts that are being manufactured together. So it'd be a net win operationally and profit wise, almost certainly as well. But also software wise, they want to go all 64-bit. I am guessing that iOS 10 does not support 32-bit operating systems or 32-bit CPUs.
Isn't it already a requirement for, like, you have to upload a 64-bit app for something? What is the carrot they were dangling for there, or the stick?
You have to have a 64-bit binary for any submission after, like, this past January or something. It was a while ago now.
But you could still have a 32-bit thing as well.
Yes, but also this year you can now, if you want to, you can now ship only 64-bit for the first time. I think with iOS 9, I believe it's the first time you can do that, where now you can say, you know what, now my app only runs on 64-bit devices. Before you could not do that. And so now they're going to have the whole lineup, as far as I know, except maybe definitely not the 5C, but once the 5C is gone, they'll have the whole lineup now running 64-bit chips that also can run Metal. So this is all, like, what they did to the Mac, moving a bunch of stuff to Metal for El Capitan. They can now do that to iOS next year with iOS 10 and move a whole bunch of stuff to requiring Metal. And if they then just don't have any devices that can't run Metal, they can do that. So that can be power savings next year. That can be performance increases. So there's a whole bunch of reasons to do this. And all of this is predicated on the entire currently active for sale lineup having 64-bit chips that can run Metal.
Did they say at this year's WWDC that in either OS 10 or iOS that Core Animation is now running on Metal?
Yeah, I think they're already doing the thing where, like, if Metal is available, like, they have a dual code path for a lot of the stuff even in iOS 9, where if Metal is available, they will use it, and if not, they'll fall back to the other way. I don't know if it's pervasive, and like Marco said, there's a big win to be had of like not even supporting the other code path. Like if you could just say, okay, well, iOS 10, is Metal everywhere. It doesn't support OpenGL. It doesn't run on devices that couldn't run Metal.
It'll be interesting though also to see if they go this way, and if iOS 10 is 64-bit only, is there still the ability to run applications that haven't been updated since this requirement that are only 32-bit? Because right now, the way the phone works now is if you run an app that does not have a 64-bit version of its binary, which basically means it hasn't been updated since this past January or earlier, and the developer was really irresponsible for the year before that. If you have an app that's only 32-bit binary, the system has to load a whole bunch of 32-bit frameworks into memory just for that app. Having one 32-bit app running has an abnormally large cost associated with it for resource usage on your phone. Whereas if all your apps are 64-bit and there are no 32-bit apps loaded, you then save that giant chunk of memory and whatever performance and battery cost comes with that.
Yeah, Apple could do to help that is maybe put more RAM in its devices. over time, over like a multi-year period, that number could change anyway.
Over an infinite timescale. So
I'm saying like a couple of years.
Yeah, right. Anyway, so now, if they go 64-bit only with iOS 10, would this be the first time that they would actually cut off compatibility with running old apps? Because with iOS, they've never done that. You can have an app that hasn't been updated since 2008. You can still run that on an iPhone 6 Plus today. It won't look very good, but it will run. And part of the App Store's appeal, on paper at least, is that it has this giant library of apps. And I'm sure lots of people, myself included, I still very occasionally need to use some kind of obscure ancient app that's still, that is giant on the current phones and has the iOS 6 keyboard and everything that hasn't been updated in forever. If you lose the ability to run all those, it'll kind of hurt. Do you think they'd do that?
They're gonna, maybe not next year, but if only to not have to support the old ARM7 instruction set and to be able to be or all 7S and 7Q or whatever the hell they come up with next. To be able to, they're still supporting Thumb, right? The little ARM4, the little tiny one. Wasn't there two on the original iPhone? Wasn't there 2 instruction sets that you could use? They would just love to ditch that silicon. It's just they'll do it eventually. iOS 10 might be a nice round number turning point. I feel like it'll be 2 more years before they pull the trigger on that. But who knows? Apple, 1 or 2 years, I think, is a reasonable time frame for them deciding to can all those ancient apps that haven't been updated. Because really, they've had time. It's kind of like the whole 30-pin connector thing. Where anyone complaining about that, it's they kept that connector for almost a decade, I think.
Yeah.
That is a reasonable amount of time. I know it might seem it may have been a decade, but I just got an iPad last year and I bought all these cables, and you're right. Sometimes someone buys it just the year before the transition. That's a bummer for you, but in the grand scheme of things, if your same binary has been running since day one of the App Store on iOS 2.0, I think it's okay now for us to say, okay, well, you didn't update it in how many years it's been? 6 years since the App Store? 7?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. That is a reasonable window. So I could say this year or next year, I would not be surprised to see them doing that. And they'll do it basically in line with when do we have the system on a chip design that reaps the benefits from dropping all these instruction sets? That's the time it'll happen.
Well, any other thoughts on the Touch?
They unlike the poor suckers who get phones, if you get an iPod Touch, you can pick from 16, 32, 64, and 128. Still the same crazy price range between them, but whatever.
Well, no, 32 is only $50 more. So they actually they inserted 32 where it would go in the phone pricing if it was there. So you have 16 as the base, 64 for $100 more. In the middle, you have 32 for $50 more.
I know, but it's if you do the actual curves of how much does this much flash memory actually cost? It doesn't make anyway. It's nice that there's a 32 in there. It would be nicer if they dropped the 16, but if any product can justify the 16, it's this. It's the cheapest, the $199. You're going to give it to your kid, whatever. This is the only product they should still be selling with 16 gigs of memory in it. But it's nice that they have a 32 in there. Just in time for 32 to become actually a little bit too small as well.
Right. Well, and keep in mind, there've been a lot of changes recently that are really making it easier to have smaller capacity devices. So iCloud Photo Library is a huge one. because then your photos don't have to live on your phone anymore or on your iPod. And with all the iOS 9 stuff with app thinning and all this stuff like that, that's all designed for minimizing disk space usage of your apps.
Yeah, although there's going to be a huge lag time on that because how long is it going to take for people to pick that up? They have the download on demand for downloading, game levels on demand and the app slicing and app thinning. Like all that stuff should just massively reduce things if developers actually use them. And then, I don't know what the lag time is going to be on using them. I hope game developers are incentivized to do it because a lot of time no one's going to buy Infinity Blade version 17 if it's 3 gigs and everyone with a 16 gig, every kid with a 16 gig device is just not going to have room for a 3 gig game. But if you can download it in 200 megs and just download levels on demand, I worry about when I watched that session at WWDC, they kept showing you can look how small your app is and then we'll download this thing on demand. It didn't seem like there was a progress API. It didn't seem like there was a callback where you could show a progress bar. It didn't seem like there was anything. It just seemed like what your game would have to say is put up a static screen that says loading level, please wait. And if it's a 500 meg level and they're on cellular, forget it, right? But if they're on Wi-Fi and the Wi-Fi is slow or the server, I worry about the viability. But anyway.
Right. And also, lots of kids go long spans during the day where they are not connected to any network with an iPod Touch.
Right. Yeah. They'll be disappointed when they advance to the next level and realize they can't play the next level. And,
until they get home that night.
Yeah. That API looks like one of those, that whole API for on-demand downloading looks like one of those APIs that will be better next year. After everyone tries it and realizes there's insufficient amount of, resolution, so to speak, of how can I get hooks into this API to provide a good user experience to let people know what's going on and to do reasonable things and not make it look like my game is broken when in reality it's just either in the process of downloading a giant level or failed to download a giant level,
Well, or you can, if you look at it from the perspective of the game publishers, there's very little reason for them to adopt it. It solves a problem that Apple has, but it doesn't really solve a problem developers have unless you really are trying to ship a 5 gig game.
Well, these games are big. Like I said, Infinity Blade's already 1 or 2 gigs, and it's just not going to fit on a 16 gig device because the kids will fill them. And so they can't buy your game, or they'll buy it and regret it and, be angry that they can't use it. People want you to tap their link and get their game on your device and play your game, especially if it's a free to play. They get no money then if it's just, they got to launch it, right? So I think game developers are incentivized to do some stuff, but even just plain old app developers, I really hope that people do the app thinning and slicing stuff because it seems like, from Apple's perspective, look how easy we made it for you. Just tag things and do this, and we'll automatically put the version, and we'll have the different binder. That should be a win. It just all it takes is for people to rebuild their apps for iOS 9 and upload new versions of them, and I hope that will happen for all the apps that I care about because they're all sort of actively maintained by people that are just going to do this anyway as a matter of course.
I'm just so happy that I don't have to do any of those APIs because Overcast is 4 megs.
You should do them anyway. You could be 2 megs.
Do them. We'll do them for what assets?
Yeah, I know.
Anyway, our final sponsor this week is Squarespace. Squarespace, build it beautiful. Go to squarespace.com to sign up. Use offer code ATP to get 10% off your first purchase. Let's face it, most of you probably know what Squarespace is. They're a place you go to make a website. So many of us need websites. So many of our friends and family needs websites. So many of our hobby projects need websites. Restaurants we go to, businesses we patronize, they all need websites. And the world of making websites in the past has often been overwrought, overcomplicated, certainly overpriced, and you have to deal with installing hosted CMSs or finding a host, hoping that host doesn't go down, dealing with all the server stuff if you host it yourself. Hosting websites has been challenging in the past, and then what you end up getting is the system that maybe you wrote it yourself if you're a programmer like us. Maybe you're using someone else's system, and you go to try to do something, and it's now the cool new thing this year is these galleries that pop up and have the things in little light boxes. That's the cool thing this year, and you could go try to do that, and I can't do that on my setup. I have to go, upgrade the whole thing or change to a different system. It's a big pain. With Squarespace, they take care of everything for you. It is all hosted by them, and they are not only extremely modern and up to date with everything that you can do on a website today that you might want to do fashion-wise, feature-wise, style-wise, mobile, commerce. They have so much stuff built in, but also As time goes on, as the web gets more mature, as new technology come around, new devices come out that you want to support, Squarespace just starts supporting that. They do it all for you. They add those things as time goes on, so you don't have to keep upgrading your site to different software or moving to a different host or anything. It's all right there at Squarespace. They do it all. They host it all for you. Your site at Squarespace looks professionally designed, regardless of your skill level. You don't have to be a coder to use it. If you are a coder, you can inject your own custom code. You can do lots of customization, and if you can just drag around colors, change fonts, and everything without any coding at all if you want to. Everything is intuitive and easy to use. They have state-of-the-art technology powering the site and your servers to ensure security and stability. You don't have to worry about your site getting hacked and spam comments being posted all over it or anything like that. They handle all of that for you. It's trusted by millions of people around the world and some of the most respected brands in the world. So Squarespace starts at just $8 a month. If you sign up for a year, you get a free domain name, and you can start your free trial today. This is a real free trial. There is no credit card required. It's a real free trial. Go to squarespace.com. Use offer code ATP to get 10% off. Start a real free trial today and just build a site. Just try it. Build a site. That's how I got into it. Before, when I had to make some sites in the past, I tried one time. I just tried doing it on Squarespace, and I was done in an hour. It was crazy how fast it was. And I had never even used it before that, and I was done in an hour. So give it a try. Check it out. It is great. Squarespace.com. Offer code ATP to get 10% off. Squarespace, build it beautiful.
Couple more things on the iPod Touches before we move on.
What do you think of the colors?
Yeah, that's one of the things I'm going to bring up. The only black one is space gray. All the other ones are white on the front.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
Honestly, I think the colors look pretty good.
The color, yeah, I do like them. I like them. I like these colors. This lineup of colors is more appealing to me than the past lineup of colors. I don't like anything with the white front. I like how it looks as a product, but I don't like looking at it. So it's kind of disappointing me that there's only one with a black front.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. But I wish there were more color options, but the ones they have I think look good.
Black and gold, at least. Come on, guys.
Well, they're not going to do black and space gray. Space gray is the new black, John.
No, I mean having a gold, a gold back and then black on the front.
Oh,
that's all I'm talking about is the front. All the fronts are white except for the model that is space gray on the back.
Is that how the iPhone is? Does the gold iPhone have a black front?
Maybe it is. Obviously they don't have 17 colors for the iPhone, so maybe you don't notice. And maybe this has been this way with the iPod Touch in the past as well, which is why I keep buying the space gray ones. But it's still, I worry with the black one being the sole one there that it's only a matter of time before they go. Not that I'm buying these for myself anyway, but anyway, both of my kids have ones that are different colors on the back, but both of them are black on the front because one was originally bought for me and then one was bought for my kids directly. And when I bought it, I remember thinking, I can't believe I'm buying this iPod Touch that's 2.5 years old.
Real-time follow-up, the gold iPhone has the white front. However, the gold MacBook One has the black bezel.
Well, that's...
I know.
I wonder if they did it, if they made a MacBook with white around the screen. Oh, no, I don't like white around the screen. I do like how it looks. That blue one with the white looks great. The red one with the white looks great. It looks great in product shots. I just don't want to look at it as a screen. But other people like it, so there you go. But anyway, cool colors. No lanyard, which I think they discovered that nobody wants to put a strap around their wrist ever. I wonder what percentage of kids use the little wrist strap on the Wii when they're using those Wii remotes. Parents probably make them do it so they don't destroy their TVs by chucking the remote at it or whatever. But I can honestly say that I never saw anyone in real life with the wrist strap connected to their iPod Touch. And though I had an iPod Touch with the wrist strap, I never put it on my wrist. I think it's still in the box.
Did you ever fling it at your TV?
No, I did not.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a cost savings. It's a space savings. You don't have that little moving part, which was kind of fun to play with, the little clicky, lanyard thing in and out. But yeah, that's an interesting experiment that apparently didn't pan out. Because if it had panned out, you'd be seeing those little things on all of their products instead of just being on one for this weird 3-year period and then going away. Oh, and the final thing with iPod Touch. No, I'm not getting an iPod Touch. I have the main reason is, of course, I have the phone now. We've already got the family plan. They pay for it and everything. People are asking if I'm going to go back to a flip phone. I'm not. But I think the biggest thing keeping me on my iPhone is that I'm now used to the bigger screen. When I pick up my kids' devices, I can't imagine using that tiny little thing. I'm now used to it. My hand is used to it. I'm used to the extra space. I'm used to the extra pixels. I can't go back again. So congratulations, Apple.
Thanks, Obama.
Right?
So, are you going to get one of the brand new iPod Nanos or iPod Shuffles?
New question mark, right?
Yeah, I think it's actually not even a question anymore. I think it's just not new. I'm pretty sure that's confirmed.
Is there different software on them? Maybe?
No, there's different colors. I believe that is literally the only change.
Yeah, I was trying to look into this, but like honestly, I had no record. I was looking at the tech specs. I'm like, I don't remember what the old ones were. It's kind of disappointing to me that like there are many areas both of these products could be improved in both hardware and software. Just through like experience of like having this been in the market for a long time, people using them, knowing which buttons are hard to press, how is it weird to hold, what materials you could do better, what seam tends to open up over time, which parts of the OS are slow or don't support a thing. But it's like just the product is not selling enough for them to make those changes, I guess. So it's just more of the same in different colors. I think it's still a good idea to sell these products. New colors is a way to get more people to buy them. It's another sort of starter product for like a little kid who wants to listen to music. And you're not going to buy them a Sony Walkman, right? You're going to go buy them a little iPod, a little cheap iPod. You don't care too much if they send it through the laundry or destroy it, especially like a Shuffle. They're like $50 or whatever. It's good that these products are in the lineup. I think of all of the iPod Nanos and Shuffles they've ever made, these are not the best versions.
Yeah, I think I agree. What's interesting, though, is that these are officially like, updated in quotes. But they can't use Apple Music tracks. Like if you download something from Apple Music, so anything downloaded from Apple Music is DRM'd, and it's kind of time bombed so that you are not supposed to be able to play Apple Music tracks if you end your subscription to Apple Music. iPods, I guess they decided through the DRM like they can't really guarantee that an iPod will have its clock set properly, or that it'll really ever check in once it's synced or anything like that. So,
or do they even have clocks? Like, I mean, they don't have wireless. Like, well, they have FM radios or whatever. But it's basically because they can't validate that the files are like if you got your Apple Music files onto your iPod Nano, they would either never play, which is the current option, or play forever. Because as long as you just don't plug your iPod Nano into anything, those are basically the only choices. So. Yeah, I'll put a link in the show notes that Serenity wrote about this whole thing. Like, it's not surprising that if you're, streaming files that rely on you having a subscription cannot go on devices that can't confirm that you have a subscription. These things have no way to tell if you have a subscription, and they could have updated them to know. They could have updated them, but that would have been, I guess, more time and effort and technology and software that they're willing to invest in this product line.
Yeah, and if Gruber's right that the reason the Nano still has the iOS 6 look to its fake iOS UI. Gruber's sources say that there's literally nobody left in the team like that. Apparently the team that did that was poached for the Watch team, and so there's basically just nobody who can work on it right now. And that sounds plausible, and because imagine if you work at Apple, like do you really want the job of updating the iPod Nano software every 3 years to look more like fake iOS? Like that's probably not a great thing to be working on if you can help it.
Yeah, the ADP tipster wants us to know that if you have trusted time on the device, that you can still use that, and there'd be, if you tried to reset the time, it would invalidate things and so on and so forth. But all of that, I would assume, would require investment in software at the very least, and possibly also hardware that doesn't exist. And so they're not going to do that investment. That they're not going to add a way for these devices to know. Maybe he's saying they already have this feature. It just seems like any kind of investment in changing the feature set of these products was just not in the cards for this revision. Changing the colors is something they could just do in manufacturing, done and done.
So the iPod Nano is $150, 16 gigs. For $50 more, you get the iPod Touch. Now, granted, it is a larger device, but otherwise, why does the Nano still exist? Why would anybody get the Nano for $150 if for $50 more you could get the same capacity in a full-blown, pretty good iOS device?
Smaller, lighter, simpler, has an FM radio. I mean, it's not a big area, it's not a growth market, but I mean, the Shuffle, I'm assuming you're excluding that one because you're like, oh, well, the Shuffle is so damn small that if you want something that's like microscopic and weighs nothing, this is your only option.
The Shuffle sucks, but the Shuffle has always sucked. I've owned multiple Shuffles in my life. They've all sucked. It's a terrible device. It is awful.
I like remember the stick of gum one, the original one?
It's 2 gigs still?
Yeah, they're all the same size.
Yes, I had the stick of gum one. That was one of them.
I'm sad that one broke because I loved that one. I thought that was a very clever design. I mean, obviously it's way too big by modern standards, but back then, I really like that design. I like the fact that it had a little thing that went around your neck. I like the little stick of gum thing. and it was nice and lightweight. I like the shuffle before they pulled in the margins and sort of wrapped the shuffle more tightly around that circular control, because that one had a place for you to put your fingers to open the little chomper, like the little clamp on the back, without accidentally hitting the previous track button, you know? This one is just too small to do anything with. That circular button on the shuffle has never really been great, but it does have the advantage that it's super microscopic. I remember the one that was like the Trident gum that had no buttons on it.
Yeah, that was short-lived for good reason.
Those were the days. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting innovation in like how small we can make this. It's just kind of sad to see it not, you know, like this is it, this little square that you clip onto things. Anyway, it's not that bad. But so why does the Nano exist? I think it is different enough. I think it's differentiated. It's differentiated from the Shuffle by having a screen and a place where you can do stuff. And it's differentiated from the iPod by being, I think, from the perspective of people who want to jog with it or something, the Nano is the size that you could, like, that you wouldn't notice it. It's still, I think, below the threshold of even if not so much from weight, but just from like having a big playing card size stiff thing like strapped to your body somewhere. Whereas the Nano, I think, is down in the range of, more towards the Shuffle end of things where you can find someplace inobtrusive to shove it. You wouldn't even have to buy like a dedicated case for it, I would imagine, but maybe you'd want to anyway.
The Shuffle to me is I'm going to do some sort of aggressive working out with this, and I don't want to break any other device. And if I do break this, it's not the end of the earth. The Nano, though, I agree with you guys. It's kind of a weird gray area. And the only thing I can think of is, what if it's for a kid who isn't necessarily old enough to be able to handle, or maybe you don't want them to handle a full-on iOS device, but, like the iPod Touch, but maybe this is sort of a halfway that's more interesting and affords you some amount of control, yet is still not a full-on iPod Touch.
It keeps the kid off the internet, basically. They want to listen to music. This keeps them off. It allows parents to delay facing the inevitable, which is, how do I handle my child who has access to the internet? Lets them push it off for a couple more years.
Right.
Although they still have to deal with, Mom, can you put this music on my iPod, please? Because they have no way to get music on it without, connecting to iTunes, for crying out loud.
Yep.
I'm asking this honestly. Do kids still care about music?
Yeah, they do.
I honestly didn't know, because it seems like music is very generational, but also that in recent generations we are actually like moving more away from it, if that makes sense. Like music is becoming less important as the generational cultural entertainment media, I guess. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Seems about the same. Like your kids one day will come home and they will know a pop song that you've never played or heard of, and they know all the words to it. You're like, how did this happen? They have peers. They have, they find out about music. They get interested in music. They eventually have demands for songs that they want on their iPods, and yeah, it's still a thing.
All right, fair enough. Thanks a lot to our 3 sponsors this week, Squarespace, Igloo, and MailRoute. And we will see you next week.
Now the show is over. They didn't even mean to begin, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. John didn't do any research. Marco and Casey wouldn't let him, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. And you can find the show notes at atp.fm. And if you're into Twitter, you can follow them at CASEYLISS. So that's Casey Liss, MARCOARMENT, Marco Arment, SIRAC, USA Syracuse. It's accidental. They didn't mean to. Accidental. Tech podcast so long.
What's going on in Overcast these days? We haven't heard much about it.
Oh man, I mean, I'm working my butt off on it basically.
So like a couple hours a day.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, maybe half hour, 45 minutes. I'm working on a big 2.0, and I'm still like. I mean, I've said this on Twitter a couple times. It's not news that I'm working on 2.0. For me, 2.0 will have a few big new features, but it's mostly about kind of nailing down all the different parts. Like, this week I was working on, drumroll please, the downloader, as usual.
Really?
So, so I finally figured out there's one of the problems that people keep reporting to me is that storage usage just seems to just keep growing over time for any given installation. It's temp files that are created by the background download system, the background download process in iOS, which I hate with a passion. There are temp files that generates, and then if a download is interrupted for any reason, like if you force quit the app, or if the app crashes, or sometimes even just if the download fails, and then it retries again, it's creating a new file and starting over again, and the old file just gets abandoned. It just so that it's the old temp file where it was downloaded to, where it was partially downloaded to, is never deleted. And I actually discovered this behavior months ago. And I issued a fix back then to basically scan for these temp files, and any temp file that was above a certain age that hadn't been touched for like a couple of days or something, I would delete. That caused lots of problems. That because the download system does not expect its files to be deleted from under itself, and they're also downloaded through this undocumented location that you're not really supposed to know about inside your app sandbox. They also recently moved that location to a different location. That's the problem. So now, all of a sudden, I thought I had this problem under control, and now people are saying, "Oh, it's all the space usage." It's mostly because of that. It's mostly because they moved the location of these files. So now I'm scanning the old directory, not the new one, and so I have to go look at that again, and obviously change where it's deleting, but also then now test to make sure it's not messing things up too badly when it does delete them. Make sure that the downloader doesn't then have weird behavior or crash when it finds that its files are gone. It's a whole ordeal. The background download system is just incredibly unreliable for me. I know some developers seem to have good luck with it. It has been insanely unreliable for me in all of my usage of it so far.
You download more things, and I think probably for more creaky servers, because tons of things you're downloading all the time. It's practically the whole point of your application. And I've seen lots of really slow downloads from wherever people are hosting their podcasts. So it's a formula to exercise the downloader. But if everything is in the caches folder, there are jobs, I assume, that are wandering through iOS, like purging the caches folder when you're under disk pressure. There's nothing that you can do as an app developer to try to say, "Hey, system, if you would like to come by and reclaim space from my caches folder, please do that now."
I don't think you can trigger it. It automatically triggers when disk space is actually filling up, and then that's when if you've ever spotted an app that says that where the icon is dimmed out for a minute and under it replaces the title with the word cleaning ... That's what it's doing. Is it's deleting all the cache and temporary files from that app sandbox in order to reclaim disk space. So I'm working on stuff like that. I overhauled the artwork system because it was not only buggy, but it was causing bad scrolling performance on the main list of episodes that everybody was complaining about, and they were right. So I fixed that. There's a couple of sources of common crashes that I fixed, and most importantly, there's been a bug for months. Literally, since I think February, there's been a bug for months where you would occasionally, if you manually reordered a playlist, sometimes that ordering would be reset back to the default ordering of whatever that playlist is, whatever the sort method is for it. So your custom ordering would be lost, and this drives people crazy. Understandably, it drives me crazy. It happened to me too. It drives me crazy. Because it is kind of a form of data loss. It's really annoying. It's I organized this a certain way, and now it's just undid it. And this took me months to find this bug. And it turns out to be a concurrency bug in the way... So basically, getting into the weeds for a brief minute here, Overcast data storage layer is built on a library that I wrote that's open source called FC Model. And it's basically a little model layer between SQLite and U. And so it does not use core data. It uses FC Model, which kind of replaces core data in the role here. And in the initial design of FC Model, instances of your models in memory were unique, so that if you requested post ID 1 from one thread, and then some other thread also requested post ID 1, if the first one was still in memory, the second one would just get another pointer to the same object, so that there was only one post with ID 1 in memory at any given time. So if you modified that, it would be the same between all the places it was being accessed. If you modified a value on it and didn't save it yet, you would get that from everywhere. In practice, that caused a bunch of weird concurrency issues and weird potential bugs, weird actual bugs. So this past February, I switched it so that if you requested ID 1 from one thread and then requested ID 1 from somewhere else, those got separate copies. And so all writes were being done separately. And there were some things in place to make sure it wouldn't get stale data here and there and everything. But basically, I changed the way that worked. And that has, for the most part, it didn't cause any problems, and it solved a few other problems. Unfortunately, the playlist reordering bug is caused by this, and I haven't quite nailed down the details yet, because it has taken me months to have this happen in a debugger once.
That is the worst.
Yeah, because it's this weird like concurrency related bug, and it's very hard to reproduce. And I've asked people for months, like, if you find a way to reliably reproduce this, please tell me.
You just throw in some sleep calls now that you know that you're pretty sure that you know where it is. You can confirm it by throwing in some sleep calls to induce the race.
Well, the one time I caught it in the debugger, I got a pretty good idea that it was due to this model being unique in memory kind of thing. Pretty sure it was from that. Anyway, so now I have a different branch of my FC model now called Unique 2 that goes back to the unique in memory model system.
Why don't you just use optimistic locking with the one where they're not unique?
I don't think I know what optimistic locking is.
It's like you version everything, and then when you go to do the update, you say, do this update, but only do the update if the version is the version that it was when I read it. And if it's not, then you have a conflict, you lost a race, and then you have to resolve it in some way. But basically, like, instead of checking every single time, because two guys got a thing. One guy's going to write first, and if you're not the guy who got to write first, when you write your thing, you could be overwriting the other guy's changes. So you do it's the SQL thing, like update blah, 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 where blah, 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 and ID equals blah, blah, blah. And if you see 0 rows updated, you're like, oh, actually, I thought I read and then wrote it back, but really someone else wrote back, so I have to reread and incorporate those changes before I can write back. It's just, or you got to go the Brent Simmons route and only do updates to your model from a single thread.
Right. Well, so database access has always been serialized onto one thread. You could read them from anywhere, but it was all being serialized behind the scenes on a serial queue. You couldn't actually be doing simultaneous reads and writes. But you could hold on to things that weren't quite saved and have it be changed under you and everything. And then I did a few months back. I did change it so that writes were all being done inside serial blocks too. So that rather than saying model.name equals Bob, model save, instead of that you would say model reload and save in this block, and then in the block you would say name equals Bob or whatever. And so those were all serialized as well. So that way, and it was literally a reload and save. Like, you would first do a select, then do your changes, then save them back all atomically on a serial thread. So it should have solved that problem. And I think it solved it in lots of places, but I guess something was still happening that it wasn't quite getting it everywhere. So the new system, the Unique 2, also does the Brent Simmons thing, where now it's all just happening on the main thread. And for a while, I thought, there is no way I should have database stuff on the main thread that will cause UI performance problems and everything. And I have such big databases for some users. There's no way I can afford that. So I just never tried it. And then last week I tried it, and it turns out it's fine. And there are so many problems it solves. Like, having all the database stuff on the main thread, first of all, it's fast enough. Doesn't matter at all. Second of all, lots of places where there was UI lag before from blocking on a database, on a massive database operation like the initial sync. A lot of times, you think you're offloading it to this background thread, then the background thread triggers an update that posts a notification, and the UI says, "Oh, the data changed. I have to reload the data to show my UI." So then it's blocking the UI anyway, while it's waiting for that reload to come through. So it turns out the whole idea of getting these operations off the main thread in practice usually didn't solve the problem, because usually the UI was still blocked waiting for the database thread to finish what it was doing. Anyway, so once you move things to the main thread, all the database stuff, then oh my God, it becomes so much simpler. Once again, Brent Simmons is right. Brent Simmons is usually right. And when it comes to stuff like this, he's really usually right. And so with this, if you make a change on the main thread, what happens with so many changes, as I said, is the UI responds to the notification and does something, updates something. When all that's happening on the main thread, it removes so many like dispatch async calls and so many so many potential deadlocks of, well, the database did this, now update the UI to reflect this, then the UI calls in the database again. It's just solved so many problems. So anyway, this is very long and boring, but that is why the playlist reordering bug happened. I made that change a week ago in development, and this used to hit me every few days. It hasn't hit me once since. So I'm pretty sure I got it. And it sure looks like the rest of the app still works fine. But I'm reserving saying that definitively. But it sure looks like I'm not having any other problems.
I think I asked you about this before, but now it's even more relevant if you're doing your database access on the main thread. Do you use any of the SQLite pragmas to fiddle with the defaults to make it faster?
I do, yeah. That I started doing that about 6 months ago.
Do you turn off the synchronous thing?
Let me see.
The thing that makes it like the thing that says like really seriously flush it to disk before you're done. Turning that off says like it'll say, "Yep, no, I'm totally done," when really it isn't. But like because we're using Flash, like I mean that's the risky one. That's like the dangerous one. And then I guess temp store memory instead of temp store disk or whatever. But some of those make a big difference, or used to make a big difference back when I was screwing with SQLite. And so once you're doing it on the main thread, it's probably worthwhile to revisit the Pragma page and see if there's anything else you could tweak. I would probably not recommend the synchronous one because you don't want to corrupt your database because then you're SOL. But
I am doing synchronous off and journal mode memory.
There you go. Well, you're living the dangerous life. I mean, I guess a power failure is like it's just it's a battery powered device. It can't get unplugged, I guess. But
Well, and also this is just data that this is basically an offline cache of something that's synced to the web. So, if local database gets corrupted somehow, which is very unlikely, as you said, but if it gets corrupted and it can't be opened, then it just re-downloads from the web. So it's not like I'm not losing meaningful user data here.
John, what was the occasion that you had for fiddling with SQLite, out of curiosity?
Web applications, database-backed web applications. And the database that backs them has been all sorts of things at various times, SQLite. Yeah. And if you're just doing something you want to do database stuff with, especially in languages that have sort of a uniform interface to any database, it's just a question of picking the driver, like Perl does and like many other languages do. You're just like, well, I'll prototype this with SQLite because then you don't have to worry about starting a server and doing all that crap. You just, it's just convenient. I mean, hell, even if you just do SQLite, in-memory database, like it's a great way to just prototype something. It doesn't even litter your file with disk. You can just tell it database name, and don't give it a file name, and it will just do everything in memory. It's neat.